The last thing my daughter said before she locked herself in the bathroom was, "Mom, if you tell anyone, he'll ruin everything." At the time, I thought she was talking about some school drama, maybe a fight with a friend or a misunderstanding with a teacher. I never imagined she was talking about a grown man, a man trusted by parents, respected by administrators, and admired by students. By the time I learned the truth, my 14-year-old daughter was carrying a secret that would nearly destroy both of our lives, and the man responsible was protected by people powerful enough to make most parents stay silent. Looking back now, the warning signs were everywhere, but like many parents, I didn't recognize them until it was too late. Just a few months earlier, everything had seemed completely normal. My daughter Ava had always hated school. Every morning felt like a battle. She would bury herself under blankets, complain about homework, and act as if walking into a classroom was the worst punishment imaginable. She was intelligent and creative, but academics were never something she got excited about. If given the choice, she would have spent every day drawing in her room rather than sitting through lectures. Then suddenly, almost overnight, she became a completely different person. She started waking up before her alarm, getting dressed without being asked, and actually looking forward to school. At first, I was thrilled. What parent wouldn't be? After years of struggling to motivate her, it felt like she had finally found something she enjoyed. One morning while eating breakfast, she couldn't stop smiling. When I asked what had put her in such a good mood, she casually mentioned that she had a new history teacher named Mr. Reynolds. According to Ava, he made every lesson interesting. He told funny stories, treated students like adults, and actually cared about their opinions. I smiled and told her I was glad she had finally found a teacher she liked. At that moment, nothing seemed unusual. Students often develop favorite teachers, and there was no reason for me to think anything was wrong. Over the next few weeks, however, small changes began piling up. Ava started spending nearly an hour getting ready every morning. She carefully picked out outfits and became obsessed with her appearance in a way I had never seen before. She watched makeup tutorials online and spent far more time fixing her hair than any 14-year-old who claimed she hated attention should have. One evening while making dinner, I jokingly asked if she was trying to impress a boy. The reaction shocked me. Her face immediately turned bright red. She practically shouted at me to stop talking and stormed upstairs before I could say another word. I remember standing there confused because her reaction felt far too intense for a harmless joke. As the weeks passed, I noticed something else. Ava's mood seemed completely dependent on one person. Whenever Mr. Reynolds complimented her work, she floated around the house smiling for the rest of the day. If he praised one of her assignments, she would bring it home and show it to me with a level of excitement I hadn't seen since elementary school. But whenever he didn't acknowledge her in class, she became withdrawn and distant. She would sit quietly through dinner, barely touching her food, and disappear into her room for the rest of the evening. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Her emotional state seemed tied entirely to whether or not she had received attention from her teacher. One night I decided to test a theory. While folding laundry, I casually mentioned that there might be schedule changes next semester and that she could end up with a different history teacher. The reaction was immediate. Ava stopped what she was doing and stared at me as if I had just announced something terrible. The color drained from her face. She asked me several questions in rapid succession, desperately trying to determine whether the change was actually happening. When I told her I wasn't sure, she grabbed her phone and disappeared upstairs without another word. That was the moment genuine fear settled into my chest. This wasn't a normal student admiring a teacher. Something deeper was happening. Ava had always been open with me. She told me about her friends, her frustrations, and even her embarrassing moments. Suddenly there was a wall between us. Conversations became shorter. She guarded her phone constantly. Every time a notification appeared, she checked it immediately. Sometimes she would smile at the screen. Other times she looked nervous. Whenever I entered the room unexpectedly, she quickly turned the display away from me. I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. Teenagers become secretive. Teenagers have crushes. Teenagers pull away from their parents. But deep down, a voice kept telling me that this was different. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I arrived home early from work because one of my appointments had been canceled. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Ava sitting alone on the front steps. Even from a distance, I could tell she had been crying. Her eyes were red and swollen. The moment she noticed my car, she quickly wiped her face and stood up. When I asked what was wrong, she insisted she was fine. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. I followed her inside and tried again, but she refused to talk. That night, she barely touched dinner and spent hours staring at her phone. Notifications appeared every few minutes, and each one seemed to control her emotions. Around midnight, after she finally fell asleep, I found myself standing outside her bedroom door. Everything in me hated what I was about to do. Parents should trust their children. Privacy matters. But my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Quietly, I entered her room and picked up the phone charging beside her bed. My hands were shaking. I promised myself I would stop the moment I found proof that everything was normal. Instead, I uncovered the beginning of a nightmare. Most of her messages looked harmless: friends, classmates, group chats, and random conversations about school. Then I noticed something strange. Ava had a second email account I had never seen before. Curiosity quickly turned into dread as I opened it. The inbox was filled with dozens of messages from a single sender. When I read the name, my stomach dropped. Every message came from Mr. Reynolds. At first, the email seemed innocent enough. They discussed assignments, grades, and future goals. But the deeper I read, the more disturbing they became. He told her she was more mature than other girls her age. He said she understood him in ways adults never could. He called her special. He told her she was different from everyone else. With each email, the boundaries between teacher and student disappeared a little more. By the time I reached the newest message, I could barely breathe. The final email read, "I can't wait to spend time with you tomorrow. Seeing you always makes my day better." My hands began trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. Every piece suddenly fell into place. The excitement about school, the obsession with her appearance, the mood swings, the secrecy, the dependence on his approval, none of it was accidental. A grown man had spent months carefully manipulating my daughter, and she didn't even realize it was happening. Sitting there in the darkness beside her bed, listening to her sleep, I felt a terror unlike anything I had ever experienced. I wanted to march into the school the next morning. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to expose him immediately. But before I made a single move, I needed to know one thing. How far had this already gone? Because deep inside my heart, I had a horrible feeling that the truth was much worse than anything I had discovered so far. And unfortunately, I was right. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to confront Mr. Reynolds immediately, drag him into the principal's office, and demand answers. But emotions weren't going to protect my daughter. If I wanted to help Ava, I needed facts, evidence, and a clear understanding of what I was dealing with. So I smiled through breakfast, asked about her plans for the day, and pretended I hadn't spent half the night reading emails that made me physically sick. Ava seemed nervous the entire morning. She checked her phone constantly and barely made eye contact with me. As soon as she left for school, I called in sick to work for the day. Something told me this situation was bigger than a few inappropriate emails. When Ava returned home that afternoon, she seemed unusually cheerful. She rushed upstairs almost immediately, carrying her backpack with a level of protectiveness that caught my attention. Later that evening, while she was showering, I carefully searched through her bag. What I found made my stomach turn. Hidden beneath textbooks and notebooks were items no 14-year-old should have been receiving from a teacher. There was an expensive necklace still inside a jewelry box. A high-end makeup kit worth more than I spent on myself in months. A gift card loaded with hundreds of dollars. Folded between two notebooks was a handwritten note. The handwriting matched the emails, for someone much more special than she realizes. "Don't let anyone tell you what we have is wrong." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the note, feeling a cold anger settle deep inside me. This wasn't admiration anymore, this was grooming. Deliberate, calculated, and escalating. Over the next week, I became an investigator in my own daughter's life. Every spare moment was spent gathering information. I photographed every gift before putting it back exactly where I found it. I created backups of the emails and saved copies on multiple drives. I began researching grooming behaviors and psychological manipulation. The more I learned, the more terrified I became. Every tactic described by experts matched what was happening to Ava. The compliments, the gifts, the secrecy, the isolation, the gradual creation of emotional dependence. Mr. Reynolds wasn't making mistakes. He knew exactly what he was doing. At the same time, I tried helping Ava without directly exposing what I knew. We watched documentaries together about abusive relationships and people who misuse positions of authority. I casually brought up news stories involving teachers who cross boundaries with students. Whenever these topics came up, I noticed something strange. Ava became visibly uncomfortable. She would avoid eye contact, change the subject, or suddenly find an excuse to leave the room. It was as though part of her already knew something was wrong but wasn't ready to admit it. Looking back, I realized she was trapped between reality and manipulation. She wanted to believe Mr. Reynolds cared about her, but deep down she could feel the truth. Then came the first moment that truly shattered me. One afternoon, I volunteered to help at a school fundraiser. It gave me a legitimate reason to be on campus without raising suspicion. While organizing materials near the administrative offices, I noticed Ava leaving class during a period when she wasn't supposed to be anywhere except history. Curious, I followed from a distance. She walked down a nearly empty hallway toward the older section of the school building. My heart pounded as I watched her stop outside an unused classroom. Seconds later, Mr. Reynolds appeared from another hallway. He looked around before opening the door and letting her inside. The entire interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it told me everything I needed to know. For almost 15 minutes, they remained inside that room alone. I stood around the corner gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every second felt like an hour. My mind raced through 1,000 horrifying possibilities. When the door finally opened, Ava stepped out first. Her face was flushed. Mr. Reynolds followed a few moments later. He smiled at her before walking away in the opposite direction. The smile wasn't the smile of a teacher speaking to a student. It was something else entirely. Something that made me want to scream. That night I barely slept. Around midnight, curiosity overcame me and I checked the secret email account again. Several new messages had appeared. Most were deleted quickly, but not before I copied them. One exchange stood out immediately. Ava had written that she was worried someone might find out about them. Mr. Reynolds responded within minutes. Nobody will understand what we have. People are jealous of special connections. That's why this has to remain our secret. Reading those words made me feel physically ill. He wasn't simply communicating with her anymore. He was actively teaching her to hide the relationship. A few days later, things became even worse. Ava's best friend, Chloe, unexpectedly called our house. Teenagers rarely called landlines anymore, so I immediately sensed something unusual. Her voice sounded nervous. After a few moments of awkward conversation, she finally asked if Ava was okay. When I questioned her, Chloe hesitated before admitting that Ava had changed dramatically over the past few months. She said Ava often disappeared during lunch periods and became upset whenever Mr. Reynolds seemed angry or disappointed. According to Chloe, other students had noticed the strange attachment too. Some even joked about it. None of them understood what was really happening, but hearing that other people had observed the behavior confirmed my fears. That conversation led me to another disturbing realization. If students had noticed something, then teachers probably had too, yet nobody had stepped in, nobody had asked questions, nobody had protected my daughter. The thought filled me with rage. Over the following days, I continued watching carefully. The more attention I paid, the more obvious the signs became. Mr. Reynolds frequently found excuses to pull Ava aside after class. He gave her privileges other students didn't receive. He singled her out constantly. Most people saw an educator helping a promising student. I saw a predator tightening his grip on a child. Then came the moment that changed everything. Late one evening, after Ava had fallen asleep, I checked the email account one more time. There was a message marked urgent. My heart nearly stopped as I opened it. The message wasn't long, but every word felt like a punch to the chest. Tomorrow after school, same place as last time. We need privacy. I miss you. Attached to the email was a photograph. The moment I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a picture of Ava wearing the necklace I had found hidden in her backpack. And standing behind her with his hand resting on her shoulder was Mr. Reynolds. Neither of them knew the photo existed outside that secret email account. But now I had proof that whatever was happening had gone far beyond inappropriate conversations, and for the first time, I realized the nightmare I feared might already be much worse than I imagined. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photograph. My 14-year-old daughter smiling nervously at the camera while a grown man stood behind her with his hand resting on her shoulder as if he owned her. The image haunted me because it confirmed what I had been trying to deny for weeks. This was no longer a teacher crossing professional boundaries. This was a calculated relationship built on manipulation, secrecy, and control. The worst part was knowing Ava still believed he cared about her. Predators like Mr. Reynolds didn't succeed because they looked dangerous. They succeeded because they convinced their victims they were loved. The next morning, I watched Ava leave for school and nearly stopped her at the door. Part of me wanted to tell her everything I knew. I wanted to show her the emails, the gifts, the evidence, and force her to see the truth. But I knew that wouldn't work. Mr. Reynolds had spent months building trust while slowly turning me into the enemy. If I confronted her too early, she would defend him. She would see me as the person trying to destroy the one adult she believed understood her. So instead, I hugged her goodbye and promised myself that I would be patient a little longer. That afternoon, I parked across the street from the school and waited. Classes ended, students flooded into the parking lot, and parents arrived to pick up their children. Ava didn't come out. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, I saw her emerge from a side entrance near the old gymnasium. She wasn't alone. Mr. Reynolds walked beside her. They stopped near a row of trees where most people couldn't easily see them. From a distance, I watched him hand her something small. Ava smiled and slipped it into her pocket. Then he touched her arm and leaned in close enough to whisper something. Whatever he said caused her to blush before hurrying away. My stomach twisted. Every day this continued, he was gaining more influence over her. That evening, I waited until Ava fell asleep before checking her room again. Inside the pocket of the jacket she had worn that day, I found a small velvet box. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a silver bracelet with a tiny heart-shaped charm. Beneath the bracelet was a folded note. I unfolded it carefully. "Every time you wear this, remember that nobody understands you the way I do." I sat there staring at those words, feeling a mixture of fury and fear unlike anything I had ever experienced. He wasn't just grooming her emotionally anymore. He was actively isolating her from everyone else in her life. Over the next week, things changed dramatically. Ava became increasingly distant. She spent more time alone in her room and less time with her friends. Chloe stopped coming over. Family dinners became silent. Whenever I asked simple questions about her day, she answered with one-word responses. It was exactly what grooming experts described. Predators slowly separate victims from support systems until they become emotionally dependent on them. Watching it happen to my own daughter felt like standing on the shore while someone drowned and being unable to reach them. Then something happened that terrified me even more. One Tuesday afternoon, Ava came home looking pale and exhausted. She rushed straight to the bathroom and locked the door behind her. Minutes later, I heard her vomiting. At first, I assumed she had caught a stomach virus, but the same thing happened the next morning, and the morning after that. Each day she seemed weaker. Her appetite disappeared. Dark circles formed beneath her eyes. When I suggested seeing a doctor, she became strangely defensive and insisted she was fine. The fear growing inside me became impossible to ignore. 3 days later, I came home unexpectedly early from work. The house was silent. As I walked past Ava's bedroom, I noticed the door was slightly open. She wasn't inside. Her backpack sat on the floor beside her desk. Something compelled me to look inside. Hidden beneath a stack of notebooks was a small pharmacy bag. My heart started racing before I even opened it. Inside was a pregnancy test. For several seconds, I couldn't move. I simply stared. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. Then I noticed something even worse. The box was empty. The test had already been used. A cold wave of terror washed over me. I searched frantically through the bag until I found a folded piece of tissue paper tucked into one corner. My hands shook so violently I could barely unfold it. Inside was the test, 2 pink lines posy. The room spun around me. I collapsed onto the edge of her bed because my legs could no longer support my weight. My 14-year-old daughter was pregnant. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Every fear I had been carrying for months suddenly became reality. This wasn't emotional manipulation anymore. This wasn't inappropriate messages or secret gifts. My daughter had been abused by a man who was supposed to protect children. I don't remember how long I sat there before hearing the front door open. Ava walked into her room a few minutes later and froze when she saw me holding the test. The color disappeared from her face instantly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke, then tears filled her eyes. "Mom," she whispered. The single word shattered whatever strength she had left. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I rushed forward and wrapped my arms around her. For nearly 20 minutes, she cried into my shoulder while I held her as tightly as I could. Finally, between broken sobs, the truth began to emerge. Mr. Reynolds had spent months convincing her that what they had was special. He told her she was mature beyond her years. He said their connection was rare. He claimed nobody else would ever understand them. Every boundary had been crossed so gradually that she hadn't realized how far things had gone until it was too late. Now she was terrified. Terrified of me finding out. Terrified of the school discovering the truth. Terrified of what would happen next. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. "Mom," she whispered, barely able to speak through her tears. "He said if anyone finds out, he'll make sure nobody believes me." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Ava wiped her eyes. "He said people will think I wanted it. He said everyone will blame me." The confidence with which he had prepared that defense revealed exactly what kind of man he was. This wasn't his first time manipulating someone. This was the behavior of a predator who had rehearsed every step. As I held my daughter that night, one thing became painfully clear. The situation was far bigger than I had imagined. And somewhere deep inside me, a terrible feeling began to grow. A feeling that Ava might not be the first girl Mr. Reynolds had targeted. And if that feeling was true, then there were other victims out there who still didn't know they were victims yet. That night, after Ava finally fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at my laptop. The pregnancy test lay beside me along with photographs of the gifts, copies of the emails, and screenshots I had spent weeks collecting. I should have felt overwhelmed, but instead I felt something else. Determination. Whoever Mr. Reynolds really was, he had underestimated one thing. He thought he was dealing with a frightened teenager and an ordinary single mother. He believed his position at the school would protect him. He believed his reputation would shield him from consequences. Most importantly, he believed nobody would challenge him. He was wrong. The following morning, I scheduled a doctor's appointment for Ava with a specialist outside our town. I didn't trust anyone connected to the school district. During the appointment, the doctor confirmed what we already knew. Ava was pregnant. Hearing those words spoken aloud felt like being punched in the chest. Ava cried quietly while I held her hand. After the examination, the doctor asked a few gentle questions. When she learned the father was a teacher, her expression changed immediately. She explained that what happened was abuse and that authorities would eventually need to be involved. For the first time, I saw a small crack form in the illusion Mr. Reynolds had built around my daughter. Someone with no personal connection to us had looked at the situation and instantly recognized it for what it was. Over the next few days, Ava slowly began telling me everything. The compliments, the gifts, the secret meetings, the promises, the emotional manipulation, every detail painted the same picture. Mr. Reynolds had carefully groomed her for months. He knew exactly how to gain her trust and exactly how to make her feel responsible for protecting him. But one confession stood out above all the others. Ava admitted that Mr. Reynolds often talked about another student named Sophie. According to him, Sophie was talented and intelligent, and he frequently compared her to Ava before insisting that Ava was still his favorite. The moment I heard that name, alarm bells went off in my head. Predators rarely stop with one victim. A few days later, I reached out to Chloe's mother and carefully shared some of what had happened. The conversation changed everything. After a long silence, she admitted her daughter had once complained that Mr. Reynolds made her uncomfortable. At the time, nobody thought much of it. Chloe had simply stopped staying after class and avoided being alone with him. As we continued talking, another name surfaced, then another. Then another. Suddenly, a disturbing pattern emerged. Several girls had received special attention from him over the years. Most of them never realized what was happening because things hadn't progressed as far as they had with Ava. But the warning signs were there. Within 2 weeks, 4 families were quietly comparing stories. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The same compliments, the same gifts, the same private meetings, the same promises that they were different from everyone else. Mr. Reynolds wasn't making mistakes. He was hunting. That realization transformed our fear into action. Working together, we began documenting everything. Every parent collected messages, notes, photographs, and witness statements. The pile of evidence grew larger every day. Then one afternoon, something happened that gave us exactly what we needed. Ava received a text from Mr. Reynolds. It was the first direct message he had sent since learning she was avoiding him. The message was simple. We need to talk. Meet me after school. Come alone. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then an idea formed. For months, he had controlled every interaction. Now it was our turn. With guidance from investigators, Ava agreed to meet him in a public place while wearing a concealed recording device. Every detail was carefully planned. Officers would be nearby. Witnesses would be present. Most importantly, Mr. Reynolds wouldn't know he was being recorded. The day of the meeting felt like the longest day of my life. I arrived early and sat where I could see everything without drawing attention. My heart pounded as Ava entered the cafe and sat at a corner table. A few minutes later, Mr. Reynolds arrived. He looked nervous but not frightened. Clearly, he believed he could still manipulate the situation. At first, he spoke softly. He told Ava he missed her. He told her she couldn't trust her mother. He insisted they shared a connection nobody else could understand. Then Ava asked the question we had rehearsed. What about the baby? The effect was immediate. His entire demeanor changed. The warmth disappeared. The concern vanished. For the first time, Ava saw the real man behind the mask. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. No one can find out about that. Ava remained silent. Mr. Reynolds continued speaking. You need to take care of it. If people find out, both our lives will be ruined. The words hung in the air. Then he made the mistake that destroyed him. He admitted everything. He talked about their relationship. He talked about the secret meetings. He talked about choosing her because she was more mature than other girls. Every sentence was captured by the recording device. Every lie. Every manipulation, every confession, the moment investigators had been waiting for had finally arrived. Before he realized what was happening, officers entered the cafe. The look on his face is something I will never forget. For months, he had controlled every situation. For months, he had convinced himself he was untouchable. Now, for the first time, he looked afraid, very afraid. His arrest shocked the entire community. Doctrines flooded school board meetings demanding answers. News stations picked up the story within days. Investigators seized computers, phones, and school records. What they discovered was worse than anyone imagined. Hidden messages linked him to multiple victims over several years. Several former students came forward after seeing reports of his arrest. Some had remained silent for years because they thought nobody would believe them. Now they finally had a chance to speak. The trial began months later. Ava testified through a protected video system so she wouldn't have to face him directly. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done. I sat beside her the entire time. Her voice shook at first, But she never stopped speaking. She told the jury everything. The gifts, the manipulation, the lies, the fear. By the time she finished, there wasn't a single person in the courtroom who doubted what had happened. When prosecutors played the recording from the cafe, the courtroom became completely silent. Mr. Reynolds sat motionless as his own voice filled the room. Every excuse, every threat, every admission. He had convicted himself. The jury deliberated for only a few hours. When the verdict was read, Ava squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. Guilty. Guilty on every count. For a moment, nobody moved. Then I saw tears streaming down Ava's face. Not tears of sadness, not tears of fear. Relief, pure relief. The judge sentenced Mr. Reynolds to a lengthy prison term and ensured he would never again work around children. Several civil lawsuits followed, forcing the school district to implement stronger protections for students. Administrators who ignored warning signs were removed from their positions. Policies changed. Training improved. Systems were created to prevent another child from suffering the way Ava had. Recovery wasn't immediate. Healing never is. Some days Ava struggled. Some days she cried. Some days she questioned whether she would ever feel normal again. But slowly she began reclaiming her life. She returned to school in a different district. She made new friends. She rediscovered her love of art. She learned that what happened to her did not define her future. Years later, as I watched her walk across a graduation stage with honors, I thought about the terrified girl who once believed her life was over. The girl who thought a predator controlled her future. The girl who believed nobody would ever believe her. She had survived. More than that, she had won. Mr. Reynolds stole years from her life, but he never succeeded in stealing her future. That future belonged to Ava, and nobody was ever going to take it from her again.